Welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, and following on from last week's successful event with Paddy McDonald in Edmonton. We're delighted, Trevor and I are delighted to present this week's presenter, Christine Nielsen, who is founder and CEO of the Contrast Consulting Group based out of Toronto. She has over 20 years experience in transformation, driving business organizations worldwide to achieve greater levels of performance and organizational results. She's an international keynote speaker and has held high-level executive positions in large firms across a variety of industries, including oil and gas, mining, telecommunications, financial services, and others. Notably, she's also the winner of the 2019 Woman of Inspiration Global Achievement Award. We're delighted to have her on with us today. Thank you, Christine, for taking some of your time. And today's subject is all going to revolve around authentic leadership. So how leveraging your purpose can set you apart as a business leader in the months to come. So welcome, Christine, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Is my volume control on this one good? Okay.
We can hear you great.
Thanks so much for asking me, David. It's really a privilege to be with everyone today, and I'm super excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is authenticity and leadership.
Well, thank you for joining us. So tell us, I guess to start us off, tell us a little bit about your professional background and experience. I know that you've held a variety of different roles, and I think all of the attendees on this call will probably benefit from getting a little bit more context in terms of your experience and some of the firms that you've worked with over the last 20 plus years.
Sure. So I cut my teeth in consulting at a really young age. I had the opportunity to learn who I was as a business leader when I was about 24 years old. I had been leading public programs for a public company while still holding down my day job in the pharmaceutical industry. And one of the members of my program that I was leading for came to me one day and he said, "Do you think you could do this transformational coaching?" They didn't understand what that was, in our company. And that company just so happened to have a red sign. It's one of the largest telecommunication companies here in Toronto, and it's international. I know we have one of our members here who belongs to that company. So that was my first foray into coaching and consulting, and it was with Rogers. And that led to a variety of entrepreneurial style coaching and consulting efforts where back then when I started, it wasn't in vogue to be a coach. You know, if you were a coach and you were a leader, if you were a leader back then, and I'm aging myself completely here, but if you were a leader back then, really, and you had a coach, there must be something wrong with you. Today, if you're a leader of any organization and you don't have a coach, there must be something wrong with you. So it's completely switched and the pendulum has swung. I have had a career that has taken me from being an entrepreneur, owning my own business, to being bought by other consulting companies, and then working in larger organizations, so working across the world, Rogers, Shaw Communications, BP, Schlumberger, Lasmo, what are some of the pharmaceutical ones? Abbott, so Royal Bank of Canada. So really a lot of corporate as well as small and medium-sized businesses. And one of our taglines at Contrast, we're a coach-based approach to consulting. So what we will say to you, there's two things. Show me a business problem, I'll show you a people problem. And then the other element of that is that we believe that the heart and the gold sits inside of any organization. People really do know what they want in their companies. They might not necessarily know how to get it out or how to make the best of it, but they really do know what they want. And they do really have a lot of the answers inside there. So they don't need strategies laid on them. They need permission to become the leader that they're capable of being so that they can actually help the company flourish and grow. So that's what we do.
It's a really interesting concept, be the leader that they're capable of being. So what is authentic leadership to you, Christine?
Authentic leadership means something different for everybody. And it's your personal, for me, it's, you know, what is my personal self-expression as a leader? And the challenge for a lot of people is they think that there's, you know, a lot of leadership books. How many thousands of leadership books are there on teaching you how to be a leader and what to do and how, what are those concepts? our leadership is typically, I call it inherited. We inherited the paradigms around leadership. So our judgments about what makes a good leader, what makes a bad leader, what I like, what I don't like, those are all inherited based on where you grew up, who you grew up around, what city, what country, who were the leaders of your time, who were the people that you looked up to. Maybe it was the school teachers or the principals. Maybe you had a hockey coach like myself. You know, what were the leaders that kind of influenced your thought process on leadership? Our job is to uncover, you know, those are interesting, but they're inherited. How do I invent and create my own authentic leadership? What is my purpose? And who am I that the presence of which will make a difference and an impact in my company or in my business? And we all have different styles. Some of us are, you know, more command and control, like to tell people what to do. Some of us are more compassionate and empathetic leaders. There's no right leadership style. The only right leadership style is the one that you're inventing for yourself, and it morphs and it changes.
Of course. So how do some of the people on this call as business leaders start to understand what is our own purpose, what is our own leadership style in that context?
It's such a great question, and I think the first part is to understand, one, that you're not a cupcake, you're not baked. So it's not over, the journey's not over, and we're constantly transforming, we're constantly learning new things. So the first place to start is understanding, you know, you don't have to have all of the answers. It's okay not to know. It's okay to give yourself permission to try new leadership challenges and to try new things, and you may fail. So the first part is not having to know everything and not having to be perfect. It doesn't come from a book. The second piece is being in that inquiry. So knowing that there's always going to be something new to learn. There's always going to be some new invisible set of expectations that we put on ourselves. And sometimes we're more of a critic of ourselves as leaders than anybody else. You know, we don't need people reminding us of what we're not doing well and what we could be doing better. And I call that, instead of working on what's not working, work on living into a gap. Who do you want to be? How do you want to invent yourself as a leader? And when you fail, like you might lose your temper on a client or you might lose your temper on an employee, you know, you will fail. And owning those failures and being responsible for them is one of the first ways to uncover your own authenticity and share with your teams and with people how to really break through and be that authentic leader. There's so many ways to how, David. I could go on and on for like 3 days about this topic, but I think the how question is really important. First and foremost, start.
So I come out of a large corporation background as well, and just thinking about some of the companies that you've been working with and for over the last 20 plus years. Are there any sort of examples that would stand out to you, obviously without naming names, but in terms of those type of situations where there is that sort of lack of understanding of one's own purpose in a leadership position of a large organization?
I think there's a lot of examples that I can use on that. Let me just say a couple of things about it. The first thing is I got lucky really early in my career. I had the privilege of working alongside of our consulting team. When my first company was purchased, I was rolled into a larger American consulting team. And I had the opportunity to cut my teeth in the consulting world, working with people like Jack Welch. And Jack back then was a guru, and he's a legend, and we miss him. The Jack back then and his leadership style would not have cut it today. So understanding what worked 20 years ago, and even the concepts, although a lot of his leadership philosophies and concepts, they still hold, but who he was being and how he connected with people would not necessarily make it in today's organizations. So we need to be able to evolve and transform and understand what is it that people need and how can they find their purpose in our leadership. So there's two pieces to that. Do you have a vision that people can get inside of and that they're attracted to and they can find their own purpose in your vision? That's the biggest element, that those principles that Jack applied then still apply now. And I think even more so today, where we're all in quarantine and people are looking at and questioning several things. They're questioning, well, what is my purpose? How relevant am I? What value do I bring to my business and my company? And if you're not questioning it, there's probably a lot of other things you're questioning, or other people might be questioning what is your value and what is your purpose, right? So that's the first piece. And then, command style leadership, we fall into that pattern by default. So anyone who's leading from fear, a place of fear, a place of covering up, not wanting to be responsible for a bad result, they fear of failure, fear of what will my other leadership team, what will the board think of me? All of those things, those are fear-based leadership styles. And they show up when something goes wrong. So in crisis, you'll see two different types of leaders arise. The leaders who blame and point the finger, and the leaders who actually dig in and find solutions. And those are more of they're not pounding their chest. They're probably a lot more quiet, but they're on the phones. They're working with their teams. They're figuring stuff out. And they don't worry about looking good or making it with people, and they don't have to have the answer. That's the authentic part of that, right? People who are leading in an authentic way, you'll see a whole lot of behaviors, and you see it every day. All you have to do is turn the TV on, and you'll see it all over the place. Did that answer your question a little bit, David?
Absolutely, and so I'm starting to understand, and hopefully shared by the attendees on the call, why authentic leadership might be a lot more important than, say, even 2-3 months ago, where we were in a relatively stable economic environment, or so it seemed. And furthermore, I guess at the end of a rather long, prosperous economic cycle. So today things are very different, yes. And so if I'm a leader today, and I want to sort of have this introspection in a sense, and start to discover my own purpose. So I think purpose is a word you used a few times. How do I start? Where do I start? If I'm listening to you.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that are really important right now. Number one, no leader has faced what we're facing right now. So if they say they have the answers, then they're not in an inquiry about what can we do differently, what do we need to do as a leadership team, as leaders of our companies and our organizations, to make pivots. How can we think differently? What are the tools that are required today that we didn't necessarily need to lean on 6 to 8 weeks ago? So if you've been in a position of high growth and you've been taking for granted, or let's just take teams, for example. Your leadership position might have been great talent is really hard to find. Now your leadership position is, how do I hold on to my great talent and give them a sense of purpose to solve challenges that are in front of our organization? Those are very different perspectives and very different ways of leading. And if any leader says that they know how to do those things, I would push back and question it. They need to be engaged in an inquiry versus having all of the answers. Now, there's two things that I'm saying to delineate that. You can engage in an inquiry with confidence. It's not a lack of confidence or a lack of competence. It's an engagement in an inquiry of unknowing and uncovering what might work, what opportunities exist for us. That's the purpose part. That's the reinvention part. Because your purpose can be reignited every day, and it really does need to be attended to. Who I am today as a leader in my company, as a mother, as a businesswoman, is not the same person I was 3 years ago, 10 years ago. Those skills have changed and transformed and evolved. So you always want to be looking at what's my intention and what future am I living into that is a fulfillment of that intention. I got very lucky very early in my career. I knew that my life was about making a difference, and I knew that it mattered. How I do that has evolved in several ways. It's gone from corporate to entrepreneurial, from being a speaker only inside of companies to being an international speaker on, this year alone. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, Christine, could you imagine yourself being a speaker in front of 10,000, 8,000 people with Tony Robbins in the same stage? No, I never would have imagined that. But I was open and willing to make those changes and pivots because it served a purpose for me to be able to communicate and make a bigger impact. That's my purpose, is impact. that answer your question?
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you. I mean, so it seems as if there may be a few obstacles and challenges for some of the leaders on this call in terms of being able to discover their purpose, being intentional, as you were mentioning before, and being authentic. What sort of obstacles or challenges do you typically see, have you seen in the past, and how can those obstacles be overcome from your experience?
There's so many. I don't even know where to start with that one. The specific challenges, I think, are understanding that, in what you focus on and what you put your attention on grows. So if you're focusing on problems, guess what's going to happen? The problem will grow. So if you're focusing, you have to figure out, number one, what are the problems that we are currently facing? And what do we suspect the problems we will be facing going forward are? And they're two different camps, because you don't know what the future problems will actually be. You have to kind of take educated guesses. That's kind of the scientist in you as an entrepreneur or business owner or a leader. And then the current problems that you're looking at, the more you focus on putting your attention on that, then what will end up happening is that problem grows, and the solutions that come out of that problem end up creating a bigger problem. Let's just take the virus, for example. The more we vaccinate, the more these viruses morph, change, evolve, the more we have super bugs, we have super things. So sometimes the solution to the problem creates the next problem. So that's what I'd like you to look at, is like, where am I tackling the problems that we currently have and actually creating a bigger problem for ourselves? Instead, switch that thinking to what problems are solvable right now, and what is a challenge that we can put in front of ourselves that takes advantage of an opportunity. So what ways can we pivot how we're looking at our business? A simple example might be, and I'll use a friend who's on this call, is, as someone who's planning conferences. Let's just take the conference world and event space world. Someone who's planning conferences and events, they're now having to move from people getting together in social situations and constantly being together to, they have to create a virtual platform for people to be able to connect at a different level. Same with leadership teams, management teams who are used to getting together and working together and, having their morning coffee and going for their Timmy's or their Starbucks and having that camaraderie. They have to create ways to invent that. That's changes in your leadership style that you didn't have 8 weeks ago. So those are kind of the, I think, some of the challenges that people are facing. The other thing that I think a lot of people are facing is a loss of momentum. Anytime we have anything with as much uncertainty that we have right now and as much unknowingness, it can drive up a lot of fear. It can drive up anxiety levels, they get higher. You're seeing now, the new norm is doing everything on Zoom. It didn't take that long for people to have the new norm, right? So people are very adaptable. And I think if we start focusing on what the problem is, we fail to allow people to adapt. So when we focus on solving challenges and creating bigger challenges, people are up for that and they'll adapt really quickly. And then they'll have less attention on what isn't working or what they don't have. Remember always, the human psychology is responding to loss, less, and never. So you've got to create a new vision and a new purpose and a new future in front of them so that they can start to respond to those things and not worry about what got taken away or what they're losing or what might never seem. Those are all default positions for the human brain. You got a 1 billion neuron processor up there, and it's pretty powerful. So
that's great. And you mentioned the current meeting environment in terms of Zoom meetings, and obviously the importance of having that vision that people can follow. How do you feel that being authentic and having that purpose can really translate into that engagement when you're communicating your vision in this type of environment? We're spending all our days now, or at least I am, it feels like, on these type of calls. So how do you feel that a leader can actually really make an impact in terms of how they translate their vision and how they get people engaged through authenticity and through their purpose?
I think one, they have to be visible. Leadership now requires a level of visibility that creates new levels of certainty. So as a leader, being on and being present in your calls and in your meetings, and sharing vulnerable times, not having the answer, not telling people what to do, but telling them, come to me with things that you need or solutions that you have to the problems that our customers are facing. So allowing people to rise to the challenges, because as a leader, you don't know. And you need to rely on your people now more than ever to make the right choices and to make smart decisions for your company, for you and your company, which requires something that leaders don't necessarily have, and a lot of people don't have access to it really quickly, is trust. Trust that the people that you hired and and yourself, you will figure something out and you will connect. So being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to have other people step up to the plate, step up to the challenge, and really rely on, you know what, you got to break down those walls. Because if they have barriers and walls to success, or they think they know the answer and people are just talking at you, you've lost them. If you're not engaging them and pulling them, you've lost them. They need to be challenged. They need to rise to the occasion. And I think that's really important, because then they find their sense of purpose. People want to know two things at the end of the day. Did I make a difference today, and was I valued? And if they don't feel valued and they don't feel relevant, that's where they either vote with their feet or they completely disengage. And your job as the leader is to make sure that you create things where people know they're valued and they know their relevancy. It can be very small or it can be very big. Let me give you an example. One of the companies that I work with is in a large scale banking system. They have a lot of, when COVID started, the markets were insane. So in capital markets, they were crazy. And there were teams that were doing really powerful things and actually buoying and providing liquidity for the banks, providing economic solutions, and doing very well. The job of those leaders of those organizations would have been to pick up the phone and have a conversation and a thank you. And the ones that did are the ones that their employees completely stayed engaged and they kept on track. The ones that didn't, less people started showing up. And I have 3 examples in the Canadian business, in the Canadian capital market space that I can point to. I won't, just in case any of you work for those examples, but I can point that out. And it's such a small thing, but it's a big missing. It's a big missing. Go out of your way to find a reason to acknowledge people for the contribution that they make or a win that they might have had, however big, however small.
It's interesting. You mentioned a word earlier that I think is very relevant in all of this, vulnerability. It's not easy to be vulnerable as a leader. Are there any sort of examples that stand out to you in terms of organizations where, you've had a leader that perhaps is less naturally inclined, given their upbringing, etc., to be vulnerable, and how breaking out of that silo can actually really make an impact? Anything stand out to you in terms of your experience?
Yeah, there's a lot, but let me give you a one that just happened yesterday. I was leading a webinar for a team of people, and one of the leaders, so there's 3 layers of management, senior level leader. It was the CEO of the company who brought me in last week to lead like a luncheon with his team. And then he brought me in again this week to do a second run of, really creating cohesivity and creating momentum. One of the senior leaders is a woman, her children are at home, and, she shared that she was feeling really overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And she said, if she's feeling overwhelmed, she can only imagine how the other people on the call were feeling. And her willingness to say she's feeling overwhelmed was new for her, because to admit for female leaders that we have any kind of weakness or crack in our armor, same for men, it's thought of as a weakness, but that vulnerability actually created her to be someone who people could relate to. And then you could see, and I asked people, just from that person saying that and acknowledging where they were at, how many of you just reduced your stress levels, like you could breathe? Because we forget to breathe sometimes. And vulnerability allows other people to take the space, to sit back, go, I'm not alone in this. And if they're feeling that too, it becomes something that you're more relatable to. People would prefer to work with someone that they can relate to and that they will be led through, because they don't have to have all the answers, than a leader who is operating on pretense.
Fantastic, and it very much relates to last week's speaker, pardon me, Patty McDonald, who was talking about, you know, sometimes you do have the time just to stop, breathe, think, and as you say, you know, showing yourself to be vulnerable creates empathy and people wanting to work for you. I can't believe it's already 11:30, so we've gone to the end of our initial half an hour. Christine, thank you very much, and I know you probably have a lot of interesting stories that we can share. I'm going to stop recording now, and we will go into our Q&A portion of the session. Give me a second.